Senator Thorp.
Mr Deputy President, it's become so clear over the past weeks and months that those opposite simply don't understand what education is. They really just don't get education at all. However, quite cynically, they do understand the value that Australians put on education. Because Australian people do get education. They do know what a valuable thing education is. That's why the Australian community embraced the review of school funding and education in this country, and they embraced the outcomes of that review that became known as the Gonski report. They know, the Australian people, that the most valuable thing we can do with our time and efforts in this country is make sure that every one of our children has the opportunity to have their full potential realised. They are our future. And that is something the Australian people knew. And that's why those opposite couldn't afford to go to the election threatening to undermine all that work and its end point, the Better Schools Plan. They knew they couldn't do it. So what happened, Mr Deputy President? Our Gonski became their Konski. It's absolutely shameful. The Coalition went into the last election saying, and I quote, "Every single school in Australia will receive dollar for dollar the same federal funding over 4 years, whether there is a Liberal or Labor government." This was a cynical exercise designed to comfort voters that whatever their election decisions may be made on any other issue, that very, very important issue, the most important issue of all, the education of our children, that was one issue on which they could say, it doesn't really matter whether I vote Labor or Liberal, I'm going to get the same outcome. Now, honestly, what a backflip. Was it Nadia Comaneci? It's a backflip of those proportions. I think it's probably the second perfect 10 of a backflip. And then that promise became a commitment to the overall envelope and quantum of funding. And then it moved to honouring the signed commitments, becomes honouring the deals for a year prior to the introduction of a new funding model. Those opposite are even trying to say that there was no deal negotiated with my home state of Tasmania. Completely and utterly untrue. Completely and utterly untrue. And the Leader of the Government knows that's to be a fact, because he knows that that agreement was made between the state Labor government and the then government. The weasel word backflips that I've heard from the Prime Minister, this must be the best one of the lot. We're going to keep the promise that we actually made, not the promise that some people thought that we made or the promise that some people would have liked us to make. Unbelievable, quite unbelievable. Stupid us, stupid journalists, stupid voters. You should have listened more closely, because without forensically looking at every slippery word we said, you couldn't really understand what we meant. The now Prime Minister might as well have stood up and said, sucked in, because you actually believed us. But unfortunately, unfortunately for the kids of Australia, the uproar has been too great. And already the Prime Minister's had to step in and reinstate the agreements with the signed-up states and territories, and come up with some hastily put-together agreements with those couple of states and territory that hadn't signed up, those sucked-in states who thought that hanging around for a new government might get them better money. How wrong they were. And now the Coalition has found the lost $1.2 billion they claimed we'd removed from the education budget, and they are still, Mr Deputy President, in very, very hot water. Let no one be in any doubt about this. The current government has abandoned the Better Schools Plan. They want to revert to a broken model that was examined forensically through a very, very thorough school review of planning and of programs and of funding, one that demonstrated that it treated schools differently and it treated well-off schools too well. They even made sure that the states can't— they haven't even made sure, I must correct myself, they haven't even made sure that the states that have most recently signed on can't use the money that they will receive to prop up their own budgets. How appalling is that, when we had this wonderful opportunity to really transform the nature of education in this country? It's absolutely appalling, an absolute waste
Thank
of time
you, Senator
and of
Thorpe. Your
opportunity.
time has expired.